Hello. Thank you for joining me once again. I am reading The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. We are in chapter 9, and this is the second part of chapter 9. And it's on page 114 where we're picking up from right now. Thank you for joining me once again. And I do encourage everyone to pick up this book, read it, reread it, or just simply listen along as I read it. For I am grateful, and I know that this is reaching everyone who it is intended for it to be reached on a universal level. And I am grateful for the receiving of me doing my part for the universe. At least I'm trying to anyway. So with that being said, let's get started with the second part of chapter 9 of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. Okay? Page 114, Personal Problems. My mind was reeling at all of this. What could I say? What could I do? Questions began filling my mind about it. Be patient, Peniel. All of your questions will be answered in time. Thus far, I've talked about the great problems of the world on a grand scale. But think, all these things are caused by individual humans. What does that mean? It is inside. It is the natural effect of selfishness. If they are an internal problem in each human, then you can see them in each small life. True? That makes sense. So let's look at the individual now, because they are the only source of the big problem. The big problems. Most people have their share of personal problems. They are microcosms of the world's problems. Some people's lives are constantly filled with discord and pain, and they can't escape suffering. Others are able to fill their minds and their days of their lives with distraction, entertainment, work, or whatever to create an illusion that glazes over the pain of their problems. Some get involved in play wars through competitive sports. But at best, living that way only delays the pain and suffering they have created in their own lives, and almost always makes things even worse. Life keeps catching up with them, piercing their illusion and leveling them with pain from time to time. Now, you say, what's the problem with you, son? Do you have problems in your personal life? I had a quick comeback to that question, just waiting up my sleeve. I guess I was no longer afraid or threatened by this meeting with Zayn. Do politicians give speeches? I said. Yes, I believe they do. But let's stay on the subject, he replied. I guess he didn't get the joke, or the joke was on me, more likely. The point is this. Personal problems come from the same place that the world's problems do. What can we do about them? Attacking the problems themselves never works for long. First, we must discover the root cause and eradicate that. The way to find a solution to a problem is really to identify the source of the problem. Our primary task then is to get a clear understanding of what has created all these terrible problems on Earth. To understand the cause of all of our problems, we need to go back to the beginning, way back. the origins of the universe and the separate self. With new proof to support the Big Bang theory, modern scientific discoveries have substantiated what the children have known since the beginning of life on Earth, that the universe began from one thing, and that all creation came from and still really is that one thing, expanding throughout space, creating stars, planets, and all life. Zayn got out an old drawing to demonstrate this ancient understanding and began to explain it to me. The mandala is a round piece of geometric art created for its spiritual symbolism and sometimes used for meditation, he said. But it is far more than art. It is a graphic, spiritual representation of the One and a symbol of the expansion and oneness of the universe into its many parts. A mandala's design consists of a myriad of many interconnected individual forms coming out of one single central source. A mandala is a good representation of our becoming separate individuals, yet still remaining one with the one universal spirit or God. This concept or spiritual principle is also sometimes symbolically represented as a tree. Many parts springing forth come from a central source. This is the image that they have in the book. Okay. Beyond roots. I understand a number of things better as I looked at and contemplated this drawing. The ancient teachings of the children talk about a time when we were just spiritual or angelic beings. Using the mandala to represent this, we would be like the outer rings of the mandala that are individual, perhaps far from the source, yet still interconnected, still one. But when we wanted to manifest, materialize on earth, we had to do so within the framework of the vibrational spectrum of the physical life on earth, which was a far slower and denser vibrational plane than the plane of light and thought that we were existing on at the time. The nature of the spectrum of physical life on earth is a myriad of individual forms, far more elaborate than we can ever draw in a mandala. It also involves dictometric separation, spelled Dictometric, dictometric separation, the splitting of one thing into two parts with opposing polarities. That's what it means. Many of the things that exist in this earth plane reflect this dictometric separation. Example, temperatures is one constant, yet it is manifested to us as seemingly polar opposites, hot and cold. Lightning and electricity involve positive and negative polar opposite charges. There are a great variety of animal species, each with polar opposite sexes, male and female. There are two sides and polar opposites to almost everything in one way or the other. Thus, our manifesting on earth required individual forms. a dictometric separation, which to us meant a great deal, which I will explain in a moment. But aren't the polarities universal law anyway? Why would coming into the earth plane make that any different or turn it into a problem? The polarities outside this plane are in harmony, connected, flowing as one. Thus, they are one, not separate. They only become polarities when they separate from their connection, which is a never-ending flow in one direction. As I said, in coming into this material world, we need it to manifest in individual forms and lower our vibration to match the environment. Like water vapors, those molecules must vibrationally slow down and get more dense in order to become ice. We lowered our vibrations, slowed our vibration until we achieved our goal. And as we manifested physically, the greater the depth of integration into the physical plane, our consciousness became more and more limited rather than universal, and the greater was the separation from the one. This also created greater separation within ourselves, and separation, polarization without the right connection, the right order of flow. Do you know what happens if you put batteries in backwards, or if you touch electrical wires to each other the wrong way? Well, I know I've done it, and either things don't work or sparks fly, and you can even cause explosions and fires. Humans live that way. When we entered this plane of dualities and polar opposites, we changed greatly from our previous spirit forms. We were no longer angelic beings with self-contained energy flows. Our eternal male and female elements had once been so fully integrated that there was not even a concept of male or female. But with the manifestation into the physical plane, these elements dichotomized, divided into male and female, polar opposite parts, now soulmates. Eventually, as we manifested deeply into this dictometric material plane, we physically became separate male and female beings. The dichotomy affected each male and female being even further and in many ways. Our previously integrated mind with logic and intellect and intuition and emotion functioning as one within the one became left and right hemispheres of a brain that divided logic and intuition. The minds of these male and female selves became dominated by either logic, intellect, or intuition, emotion. As a degeneration, lowering of vibration and consciousness occurred further, the males generally became more logic, intellect oriented, and the females more intuition, emotion oriented. Logic and intuition were no longer functioning in balance as one within the one, and the two halves are in opposition rather than in flow. That's the reason males and females don't understand each other often and often argue. The big breakup. This lowering of vibration and separating from the one went too far. For an example, Think of the universe as a great single continent, surrounded by a dense, dark fog. We were the land in that continent. If we are a peninsula, we might stretch way out from the continent and be surrounded by the dark fog. But as long as we still have a tiny piece of land connecting our peninsula to the continent, we are still the continent and have all the life of that continent. But if we totally separate, we become an island, a tiny island, all alone, not even able to see that there is anything else out there other than ourselves and all that dark fog. Or let's use the mandala representation again. Think of it as the very outer parts of the mandala actually separating. They lose their connection. They lose their universal consciousness, and subsequently its peace, its awareness, its coordination, and its guidance. This is the example they give now. See if you can see it. Can you see that? It's separating. It's not together. You see me? They lose everything that being one with God had to offer. They are no longer in the flow of things. They also lose harmony and peace with the other parts. They have separated. The self reverses polarity. Upon separating from the one, the separate self turns its attention to itself. Since the separate self attention is directed towards itself, attention is directed inward rather than outward. And the direction of mental energy is thus inward. Negative polarity, vacuum, intaking, rather than outward. Positive polarity, outflowing, giving. This puts it out of harmony with universal flow and order. This inward direction naturally then gave birth to a way of being, a selfishness. Selfishness is virtually a path, a way of being. It is the way of being taking. It's the way of inward flow, of negative flow, like being a black hole whose gravity is so great that it sucks everything into itself, even light. Thus, we have the selfish separate self. And from that, all of our personal problems and the world's problems originate. Just examine it and see for yourself. In placing attention on giving energy to the separate selfish self, we turn away from being receptive to the outflowing source of universal consciousness and maintain selfish, separate self-consciousness. Self-indulgence is then simply the natural outcome, the natural order of things once the selfish separate self has established itself with its own consciousness, and the individual's focus and attention feeds that consciousness. It has lost awareness of its connection with its spiritual nature, and thusly the universal spirit and universal consciousness. I understand, but why is it so hard for people to see and change? Seeing is one thing, changing is another. In so becoming cut off from the universal spirit, the source of creation, humanity has become blind in a sense, no longer aware that we are all one. People act as the negative polarity. They look to take and get rather than give as the way of the positive polarity. It's look out for number one rather than a love thy neighbor approach to their brothers and sisters. This negative, selfish way of being creates more negativity, pain, and suffering for all, including the separate self. What went so wrong? Exactly how did all this happen? Since all the matter, all the stuff of the universe is in reality one stuff, nothing can truly be separate from the one universe. But humans gradually became separate from the one as far as their awareness, their consciousness was concerned. It's as if mirrored walls surrounded each individual self. All each self primarily saw all the time was itself. And everything else it saw had to first be reflected in the mirror of the separate self. This gave birth to an illusion, a belief that they were indeed separate, which gave birth to a new kind of total separate self-identity. This is where human consciousness still is today. So this is what you're saying my problem is, and what I need to deal with so badly right now? Does it not exist in only you? You think you are it. You think you are the separate self. The separate identity naturally has primary awareness of itself. After all, it lives in a room full of mirrors. Its focus is on itself. Its attention is on itself. It is thus self-centered. Each self actually has the notion that it is the center of the universe. Don't you? People won't admit it naturally, but isn't it everything you see, feel, and think reflected off the mirror of yourself? Don't you always relate everything that happens around you to how it affects you? It's only natural, unless you have universal consciousness. Let me back that up. Don't you always relate to everything that happens around you to how it affects you? It's only natural unless you have universal consciousness. This is even affecting how you are functioning as a member of this monastery. I don't understand. Have I done something wrong? Of course. How could it be any other way with your present limited consciousness? But I understand that. That is not the issue now. That is not the big picture I want you to get first, that you are still not getting. Think for a moment what kind of problem there would be if the members of a football team no longer had team consciousness, group consciousness, no coordination, no guidance from a central source, not even any awareness of what the other players were going to do each play. And what if they weren't even in harmony with their team in general and would sometimes play for the opposing team? And then add selfishness to the factor. Each player considered themselves the most important player in the world, wanted to be the star, wanted all the attention, with no real concern as to whether the entire team would win. Or what if the members of an orchestra were unaware of what the other players were playing and didn't even care? Take these kind of problems to a far greater level, to a team so large it encompasses everything in the universe. That gives you just some idea of how bad having a lack of universal consciousness is. On a smaller scale, even, consider what would happen if just your arms and legs left the guidance, coordination, and consciousness of the entirety of your body. Then they got their own identity and developed selfish, separate selves. You would have such things as one hand trying to put on a glove in the snowstorm, not caring what happened to the other hand. And the legs would be doing their own thing at the same time. What chaos. Again, just look around at the condition of the world to see the chaos here. So this isn't about some problem I have or something I did wrong or I'm in trouble about it. Yes and no. Stop persisting in this self-centeredness and listen. Yes, it is about you. No, it isn't about you. Get out of yourself and you will see the point. You are living in a delusion, Peniel. Serious delusion. Engrave this in your mind. It is so important. The Atlantean children of the Law of One teach that the world's problems are personal problems, and all the actions that create the problems come from our delusion that we are separate from the One, and the selfishness that results from that delusion. Think about it, Peniel. Would there be wars if we knew we were one? If all you could do was fight and hurt yourself? No. Exactly. Because what is the point of hurting yourself or waging war on yourself? Would there be oppression? None. Because what is the point of oppressing yourself? Would there be anger, jealousy, theft, starvation, racial hatred? No. It wouldn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Think about all the problems I just mentioned. What is behind each one of them? Humans, yes, but what is behind their problems causing actions? You already know, but you will need to teach the masses someday. Don't let them get caught in the surface illusions. Don't let them think the problem is greed, because what's the source of greed? Selfishness. Don't let them think the problem is hate. What is the source of hate? Selfishness. Proclaim it for all to see. Tell them in your book and your meetings. Help them clearly and finally understand that the real problem, the real enemy, the real source of all the bad things on earth is simply selfish people acting selfishly. And it is up to each person to change themselves, not the world. That is the only way to change the world. Each of us is a selfish person acting selfishly. We are thus our own enemy. And going further to the root of the matter, what is behind selfishness? Thinking you are separate from everything else. Then looking out for number one begins. And when you have a whole world full of people looking out for number one, you can see the results. Just turn to the news. Sleeping with our enemy. Like the ancient Atlantean teachings say, and Zayn so intensely drove home in me in order to permanently eradicate this selfish monster that plagues us all and plagues the world, we must get to the root of it all. If you want to permanently kill a plant and ensure that it won't grow back again, you need to destroy the root. At the root of selfishness is our illusion that we are not one with all things, all life, the entire universe, and our subsequent belief that this illusion is real. This belief created a new identity and supports the existence of this new separate identity that is normally selfish. That is naturally selfish. And therein lies the enemy. But our belief is a lie. The illusion is not real. It is like we are all asleep and thus out of touch with the reality of the real awake world that is around our sleeping body. We are each sleeping with this enemy we created. We remain unconscious, letting our enemy command the helm of the ship of our lives, like a dream we have no control over. Meanwhile, our spiritual self, the part of us that is one with the universal spirit, is locked up in the brig and just forced to go along on the voyage like so much baggage. That is something that each of us must personally come to deal with, and then become on alert about each moment in all our days on earth. But you cannot fight your selfish separate self directly. It only gives it energy. What do the Atlantean children of the Law of One's teachings say about how we must deal with it if we want it to change? They say that the only way to change things and get back in harmony with the One is to starve the selfish, separate self of energy, of giving it into it, of thought, attention, and simultaneously nurture the inner being, the spirit within us. And this requires help. My greatest help was primarily Zayn and his insight into me, combined with his wisdom, and only secondarily the ancient teachings. So I need to be less self-centered. Zayn just sighed. Then after a few moments he spoke. You need more help. You need to use the resources you have at your disposal to see yourself more, to know yourself better, and meditate on that to deal with it. More on that later. But eventually, I finally got it. I had not been looking at my self-centeredness enough. I was avoiding the things I needed to do to break those self-mirrors that totally surrounded me in the room of my life. The self-mirrors that I thus saw all things reflected off of first, instead of seeing pure object reality. I didn't know myself. And he, as all true teachers do, was mirroring my inner self and not letting me get away with my delusion. He was simply reminding me about it and helping me deal with what I needed in order to realize my continued self-deception. Know yourself. The separate self is a very clever thing. It has the ability of a supercomputer. It has your brain at its disposal. It has all the knowledge you have, all the cleverness and cunning you have. It can lie and confuse even you. People delude themselves all the time. It has control of everything you control. Like Sherlock Holmes, you must anticipate every step of monastery if you want to beat it. If you want to beat him at his own game. Obviously, then, knowing the intricacies and modes of operation of yourself is a key to many things. You must know yourself in order to transcend yourself and regain universal consciousness. And if you truly understand yourself, you will know all other selves. For all selves are the same, and they behave the same way. For instance, how can you understand anger in another if you don't understand it in yourself? And when you thus know and understand all selves, you will really understand the world. Thus, understanding others allows you to bridge the gap of separation and help them achieve universal consciousness also. When you truly know yourself, you see your own selfishness, transcend it, and become a person who loves unselfishly. Then you will clearly understand the selfishness in others and the unselfish love in others. You will see both aspects simultaneously as a whole. How to fully know and transcend yourself will be addressed in the chapters on the teacher-student relationship. Right now, we need to cover more of the basics of what the selfish, separate self is and how it affects our lives so we can totally understand it. The conscious scale. Each person has the potential to be both selfish and to unselfishly love. Imagine there is a meter that has a scale with selfishness, negativity on the left, and unselfish love, positivity on the right. Your consciousness is the needle on this meter. Most people act selfishly most of the time, and sometimes act unselfishly. So the needle jumps around a bit. But everyone has a status quo of sorts where the needle stays most of the time. This average location of the needle represents the general level of their state of consciousness. 3 makes a whole. As if separation from the one didn't cause enough problems alone, the separate self is further separated within itself. And the lower an individual's consciousness is, the more there are internal separation problems. You may have noticed how numbers and certain mathematical geometry seem to weave through threads throughout life and are somehow significant to many things. This has to do with vibratory nature of existence. and it is discussed more in a later manuscript, but it also applies in the following teachings. But in any case, here are some obvious scientific facts and some teachings about our two and threefold natures. Some aspects of ourselves divided into two parts. There is the selfish, unselfish, split parts we just spoke of, the male and female split, the logic intuition split, the intellect emotion split, the positive negative split, and the two splits parts are often at odds with each other. Some people, regardless of sex, are more right-brained, and others are more left-brained. Still, other aspects of ourselves are divided into three parts, which we are about to discuss. All creation itself has a threefold nature. Within the threefold nature, we can also see the twofold dichotomy of the material plane. These natures can be looked at and thought of in many different ways. But here is the fundamental concept. The first nature is light, the positive polarity. The second nature is darkness, the negative polarity. The third nature is the interaction or intercourse of darkness and light as a whole. The threefold nature has been represented by various religions in various ways. The yin and yang, dark and light interacting in a circle, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, etc. Four represented in many ways, such as the cross, the tetragrammaton, the oldest name of God, indicates the offspring of the three and the beginning of a new cycle of creation. This will be covered in depth in a later chapter. Since we are really part of and one with all creation, each of us individually is also of a threefold nature. This threefold human nature manifests in many ways. The threefold essentially vibratory nature of our human manifestation is spiritual, mental, and physical. You can also see it in the nature of our consciousness, in that called the subconscious mind, the conscious mind, and the universal conscious mind. The balance and coordination of the threefold nature has been and still is lost with most people. A twofold dichotomy is the dormant nature of our material existence on earth. Thus, few ever really relate to the spiritual, but all relate to the mental and physical. Also, few ever relate to the universal consciousness, but all relate to the subconscious and conscious mind. If we were as we should be, our inner being would be coordinating these parts of ourselves, and they would be functioning as an integrated whole. And ordinarily, the universal spirit would be guiding the entire process, keeping us functioning harmoniously within ourselves and in harmony with the One. But because our consciousness is cut off from the universal spirit and we are not properly in touch with our own inner being, we are uncoordinated and we are an uncoordinated internal mess. Obviously, we need to recoordinate all these fragments of ourselves. We achieve this as a natural side effect of transcending selfishness by developing and fostering our unselfish love for others. The process is also aided by various techniques and exercises described later in the book that coordinates the subconscious, conscious, and universal minds. For those who achieve reunification with the universal spirit, paradise awaits, making a new world. As we pointed out earlier, when you have a whole world full of people who selfishly care more about themselves than others, you have a world such as it is today. But on the bright side, can you imagine what it would be like if we all cared for each other more than ourselves? Contemplate that for a while. That's what the children teach and work for. The ancient Atlantean teachings also proclaim that those who want to help change the world for the better must first change themselves and transform into unselfishly loving beings. It takes a fire of some kind, at least, to light a fire. The children's ancient Atlantean teachings say that if you want to live in a world of loving people, be a loving person. They also teach that one of the ways to achieve this is to put others before yourself, to love others first, to consider others first, to give to others first. There are some who are against the idea of caring for others first. They say you must love yourself first in order to love others. But as Ayin told me long ago, examine the results of the two philosophies with an open mind. An answer will become clear. There are many who have succeeded in loving their own self first, but have never gone on to really care for anyone else. They just further their own selfishness. They continue to be selfish contributors to a negative world. On the other hand, all those who have embraced caring for others first always loved their own self too, their own self also. Think about it. If you love others first and you become an unselfishly loving being, is it impossible to then not feel good yourself? Not love yourself? No. There is no way anyone could not love themselves then. You would love yourself automatically and feel great about yourself because your unselfish love is of great help to all, including yourself. This is also the way you can unselfishly love yourself. And unselfishly love is truly the only real love. There is a law of one in action here. Let me reiterate the facet, an antidote to illustrate this. Try to see it like this. We are all one. We are like one who needs and wants water, love. We are valves, faucets, connected to a water supply. When we let the water flow freely giving it out, it is also flowing in us and through us. But if we try to possess our water by shutting off our giving, not letting the water flow through us, we shut off our own supply, for it is no longer in us. This is truly loving yourself. Not first, not second. It is simultaneously, just by giving it, doing it. Here is a parable from a scroll I found in the library, written in the 1st century AD by an early Christian sect in Greece. Judging from the insightful story, this sect apparently were real Christians, i.e., people that followed Jesus' teachings, and living example about unselfish loving rather than merely worshiping and praising Jesus. The story uses a striking allegory fantasy to clearly illustrate a fundamental difference between a world of people looking out for themselves first and a world of people giving first. Here we go. There was a man who died and was being taken to heaven by angels. The angels said to him, "We are going to take you to heaven, but first we will show you hell." The angel then took him to a place where there was a great bowl, so great that it was as big as a lake. The bowl was filled with a nutritious stew. All the way around the sides of this bowl were people. Emancipated, starving, miserable people. These people had spoons to eat the stew with, and the spoons were long enough to reach the stew, about 12 feet. The trouble was, while they could scoop up the stew into the spoon, they could not get it into their mouths because the spoons were too long. So here were all these pathetic people suffering and moaning in agony constantly, trying to eat the food that was abundantly in front of them, all in vain. Next, the angel took the man to heaven. To his surprise, he saw the same scene. There it was, a giant lake-like bowl of the same stew, surrounded by people with 12-foot long spoons. Yet something was different here. All these people were smiling, happy, healthy looking. Why? What is the difference here that these people are happy and well fed? The man said to the angels. They replied, "Have you not eyes to see?" The man looked more carefully and observed that one person would scoop up the stew and bring it to the mouth of another. Then someone else would scoop up the stew and feed it to the other. The angel smiled and said, "Here the people feed each other. Here are the people that learned the way of love." Some of you agree with the ideas expressed in this parable and would like to live that way. Yet you find yourself questioning the practicality of doing something like that. It's not unreasonable to think something like this, but if I give all for others, I will surely be taken advantage of and have nothing. If that is your quandary, take heart, there is a way. It seems too idealistic or impractical to you right now to stop thinking selfishly. And in a way, you may be right. It is a bad idea to change yourself into a being who gives and lives for others without discretion. Giving to selfish people can sometimes do the people you are given to more harm than good. There are plenty who will selfishly take, and there needs to be discretion as to who to give to and how. But there are ways around having to deal with this when you are in a transitional and learning phase. This is part of having a monastic period in your life and having and or living in a monastery spiritual community is all about. Discussed more in later chapters. Well, that's all for today with chapter 9. Next time, obviously, will be chapter 10 in the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teaching of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. I know I've enjoyed it, and I hope you have as well. Pick up the book for yourself, check it out, read it, reread it, give it as a gift if you choose to. And if you choose not to get the book, I am grateful for you listening to me. I'm enjoying this process, and until the next time we speak, I know I myself am going to try to be more unselfish and be more loving, unselfishly loving towards others. Okay? Have a good day.